In a world where trust is fragile and power is a dangerous game, Ethan Walker thought his days of fighting shadows were behind him. But when fate draws him into Claire's desperate struggle to protect her young son, Oliver, from a deadly organization known only as the Syndicate, his quiet life is shattered. The Syndicate isn't just any enemy. They control politicians, law enforcement, and the media, silencing anyone who dares defy them. As Ethan, Claire, and Oliver race against time, they uncover a terrifying truth. The Syndicate's leader is none other than Senator William Cross, a man revered as a national hero. With every step forward, the danger grows. The trio must navigate betrayal, impossible choices, and moral dilemmas that blur the line between justice and vengeance. Alongside unexpected allies, they attempt to dismantle a web of corruption that spans higher than they ever imagined. But when the final confrontation arrives, and the cost of survival is steep, Ethan faces one question: how far is he willing to go to protect the people he loves? The rich aroma of pan-seared steak wafted through the air as Ethan Walker carefully plated the dish with precision. The golden crust on the steak glistened under the warm kitchen lights, paired with a delicate medley of roasted vegetables and his signature red wine reduction. He wiped the edge of the plate clean with a swift flick of his napkin and handed it off to a waiter. The restaurant, Gourmet Haven, was at full capacity that evening. The murmur of conversations mixed with the sounds of clinking glasses and silverware created a symphony of success, a melody Ethan had dreamed of since he was a boy. Watching the dining room from the kitchen window always gave him a moment of pride. But tonight, the triumph felt hollow. He checked his watch. In just over a week, he'd present his new menu at the Food and Flavor Expo, the biggest culinary showcase in the city. Winning the coveted Golden Plate Award would solidify his place as the top chef in the region. Yet something tugged at his thoughts. Ethan turned to his office door and frowned. It was slightly ajar, though he was certain he'd closed it. He stepped inside and froze. The desk drawer where he kept his grandmother's recipe journal was wide open. No! He rifled through the drawer, his heart pounding. The old leather-bound journal was missing. A knock at the door made him spin around. Ava Clark, his sous chef, stood there holding a familiar book in her hands. "You're looking for this?" Ava's brows knitted together in concern. "I found it behind the flour sacks in the pantry." Relief washed over Ethan like a cool wave. He took the journal from her and inspected it. The pages were filled with handwritten recipes passed down from his grandmother, Margaret family secrets that no one else knew. "Thanks, Ava," she smiled. "You should keep this locked up tighter. It's basically a treasure chest." As Ava left, Ethan flipped through the journal absent-mindedly, running his fingers over the old, ink-smudged pages. His grandmother's flour-dusted hands came to mind. Margaret had taught him everything: how to recognize the right ripeness of produce by scent, how to balance bold flavors with restraint, and how to infuse heart into every dish. A loose parchment slipped out from between the pages, fluttering to the floor. Frowning, Ethan bent down to pick it up. The paper was old, its edges yellowed. On it, a single line was scrawled in thin, jagged handwriting. "The past holds more than memories, it holds debts unpaid." Ethan's pulse quickened. His brows furrowed as he read the words again. Who could have written this? He searched the journal for other loose papers, but there were none. Unease settled in his chest. This wasn't part of his grandmother's writing. Her letters had always been neat and precise. This handwriting felt rushed, panicked even. Ethan leaned against the edge of the desk, trying to make sense of the cryptic note. His grandmother had always been an open book, sharing her life stories while they cooked together. What debts could she have possibly left behind? His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was an incoming call from Logan, the restaurant's manager. "Hey, Ethan!" Logan's voice crackled through the line. "We're out of truffle oil, and the supplier's delayed. Do you want me to use a backup?" Or should I call in another vendor? Ethan took a breath, pushing his worries aside. Use the backup for now. Let me know if there's anything else. After ending the call, he set the journal back into the drawer and locked it this time. He knew he needed to focus, but the strange note lingered in the back of his mind. Later that night, after the last table had been cleared and the kitchen was quiet, Ethan found himself alone, staring at the empty dining room. The soft, amber glow of the overhead chandeliers made the polished tables gleam. It was a scene that should have filled him with satisfaction, but instead, unease gnawed at him. He thought about Margaret's stories, tales of her early days working as a chef in the bustling kitchens of New Orleans, of how she'd fought for recognition in a male-dominated world. She had always been fiercely independent, but what if there were things she hadn't told him? Secrets she'd taken to her grave. Deciding that some fresh air might clear his head, Ethan stepped out into the alley behind the restaurant. The night air was crisp and carried the faint scent of rain. He leaned against the brick wall and closed his eyes, listening to the distant hum of the city. A soft, rustling sound made him open his eyes. He looked down the alley and saw a figure moving in the shadows. "Hello?" Ethan called out. The figure froze, then took a step forward. The dim light from the street lamp revealed a gaunt face with weary eyes. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was Claire Bennett, his former mentor, the woman who had once been his guiding light in the culinary world. "Claire?" Ethan took a hesitant step forward. "Is that really you?" Claire nodded, her face pale and drawn. Her once bright blue eyes looked hollow, as if life had drained away her vitality. She was wearing an old, oversized coat, and her hair was disheveled. "What are you doing here?" Ethan's voice was filled with both confusion and concern. Claire's gaze darted down the alley, as if she were checking to make sure they were alone. Then she pressed a crumpled slip of paper into Ethan's hand. "They're watching me," she whispered. "I need your help." Before Ethan could ask more, Claire turned and hurried away, disappearing into the shadows. Ethan unfolded the paper she had given him. It contained an address, an old warehouse in the industrial district. His stomach churned. First the mysterious note, now Claire's sudden appearance and cryptic plea. What was she running from? And what had she dragged him into? Ethan stood there, staring into the dark street. The air was thick with questions, each one heavier than the last. The slip of paper in Ethan's hand felt heavier than it should. He read the address again, squinting at the faded ink. 127 Briar Street. It was an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, a part of the city where abandoned buildings stood like forgotten tombstones. The memory of Claire's hollow eyes gnawed at him. He couldn't just let this go. Claire Bennett wasn't just anyone, she had been his mentor, the person who taught him that cooking was more than following recipes. It was an art form, driven by heart and memory. But something had broken her, and she had come to him for help. Ethan locked the restaurant and drove through the quiet streets, his mind spinning. What could Claire possibly be caught up in? And why the secrecy? By the time he reached Briar Street, the night had deepened. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting shadows that danced on the cracked pavement. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted metal door slightly ajar. Ethan hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but loyalty to Claire pushed him forward. The inside of the warehouse was dim, lit only by a single overhead bulb that swayed gently. The air smelled of metal and damp concrete. Stacks of old crates lined the walls, and silence hung thick in the air. "Claire?" he called, his voice echoing. Footsteps shuffled from behind the crates. Claire stepped out slowly, wrapped in her oversized coat. Her hands trembled as she hugged herself. "You came." Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "Of course I did," Ethan said, walking toward her. "Claire, what's going on? Why are you hiding in a place like this?" Claire's shoulders sagged, as if the weight of her story was too heavy to carry. I never told you the whole truth, Ethan, she said, looking away, about why I left Copper Hearth. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest. You sold it because you wanted a break. You told everyone it was time to start fresh. Claire laughed bitterly. That's what I wanted you to believe. But the truth is, I sold it because I had no choice. The words hung in the air like smoke. Claire sat down on a wooden crate and took a deep breath. James, my husband, he wasn't just a dreamer, he was desperate. When we couldn't secure funding for the expansion, he reached out to the wrong people. Ethan frowned. Who? Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. The Syndicate. Ethan froze. The Syndicate wasn't just some urban legend. They were a criminal organization notorious for funding failing businesses in exchange for dangerous favors. They used legitimate fronts like restaurants and shops to hide their illegal activities until the debts came due. James thought we could outsmart them, Claire continued, her voice cracking. But they don't forget, and they don't forgive. When James couldn't pay them back, they took everything: our restaurant, our savings, our future. After he died, they said I owed his debt. Ethan's mind reeled. The Copper Hearth had been Claire's dream. To think that it had been stripped from her like that was horrifying. I ran, Claire said, staring at the floor. But they found me. They always do. Ethan knelt down beside her, his heart aching for his old mentor. Why come to me? You could have gone to the police. Claire's eyes snapped up, wild with fear. The police can't stop them. You don't understand, Ethan. They have people everywhere. I've been watching my back for years. She swallowed hard. I wouldn't have come if I didn't have another choice. But they're not after just me anymore. Ethan's stomach turned. Who else? Claire hesitated before whispering, Oliver. Ethan's eyes widened. Your son? Claire nodded. He's all I have left, Ethan. And they know that. If I don't pay what they want, they'll use him to send a message. A wave of cold fury coursed through Ethan. He couldn't fathom how anyone could threaten a child. He clenched his fists. We're not going to let that happen. Claire shook her head. I can't drag you into this. You didn't, Ethan said firmly. I'm here because I owe you more than you know. You saved me once, Claire. Now it's my turn to help you. Claire's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. But before she could speak, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Ethan sprang to his feet, his senses on high alert. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a tailored coat with sharp features and an unsettling calmness in his eyes. It was Marcus Reed, Ethan's head chef. Marcus? Ethan's voice wavered with confusion. Claire shot to her feet, stepping in front of Ethan protectively. You? You're one of them? Marcus raised his hands, a placating gesture. I'm not your enemy. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Then why are you here? Marcus stepped closer, keeping his voice low. Because I've been undercover working to take them down from the inside. He glanced around nervously. But time's running out. You need to know something. Ethan, the Syndicate, has been using your restaurant. Ethan felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. What do you mean? Marcus's face was grim. The money they launder, it's moving through Gourmet Haven. They've been using the supplier connections to funnel funds without you even knowing. The weight of Marcus's words hit Ethan like a blow. His success, his life's work, was tied to something he'd never agreed to. Claire's expression hardened. You expect us to believe you? Marcus exhaled. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I've risked everything to get here tonight. Ethan's mind was spinning. If Marcus was telling the truth, everything he had built was under a shadow of deceit. So, what now? Ethan asked, his voice thick with anger. Marcus stepped forward. We take them down, together. But it won't be easy. Claire's jaw clenched as she exchanged a glance with Ethan. We can't let them win. Ethan took a deep breath. Then we fight. The flickering light above cast long shadows as the three of them stood together in the warehouse, a fragile alliance forged by necessity and bound by a shared resolve. The fight against the Syndicate was no longer just Claire's battle, it was Ethan's now too. The warehouse air was thick with tension, the silence pressing in after Marcus's revelation. Ethan's head swam as the words repeated like a broken record. "They've been using your restaurant." Claire's voice cut through the haze. "If what you're saying is true, Marcus, then why now? Why come forward after all this time?" Marcus took a cautious step forward, keeping his hands visible, a man who knew how quickly trust could evaporate. "Because their next move involves Oliver," he said, his gaze locked on Claire. "I overheard them talking. They're planning to use him as leverage." Claire's face paled, and she gripped the edge of a crate to steady herself. "No, no, they wouldn't." "They would," Marcus interrupted gently. "And they will, unless we stop them." Ethan felt anger flare in his chest like an open flame. "So, what's the plan? If they've been running this through Gourmet Haven, then how do we take them down without bringing the whole restaurant down with it?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "We need proof, hard evidence. They've been careful, but there's one thing they can't hide, their ledger." Ethan frowned. "A ledger?" Marcus nodded. "Every transaction. Names, dates, amounts. If we can get our hands on that, we have everything we need to dismantle their network. But it won't be easy." Claire stepped forward, her voice thin but resolute. "Where is it?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "It's not in some secure vault. It's encrypted. On a flash drive." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Where's the flash drive?" Marcus paused, reluctant to speak. "Oliver has it." Claire gasped. "My son?" Marcus nodded. "James. He gave it to him before he died. Oliver doesn't know what's on it, but the Syndicate does." Claire sank onto the crate, her hands trembling. Ethan moved to her side, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We need to find Oliver," she whispered. Ethan stood and pulled out his phone. "I'll call him." Claire shook her head quickly. "No, they could be monitoring our calls." Marcus agreed. "We need to move carefully. I know where Oliver's been staying, the apartment above that old bookstore on Elm Street." He looked at Claire. "Is he still there?" Claire nodded, her eyes wide with worry. Ethan grabbed his car keys from his pocket. "Then we go now." The drive to Elm Street felt like an eternity, the city's neon lights flashing by in a blur. Claire sat in the back seat, staring out the window but seeing nothing. "I should have done more," she murmured, almost to herself. Ethan caught her eyes in the rearview mirror. "You did what you could. Now we'll finish this." Marcus, seated in the passenger seat, stayed quiet, his hands resting on his lap, but Ethan noticed his fingers tapping nervously. For all his calm exterior, Marcus was carrying his own share of the weight. When they reached the old bookstore, the street was eerily quiet. A lone street lamp flickered, casting shadows over the cobblestone walkway. The bookstore sign above the entrance was faded, its once bright lettering now chipped. Claire led the way up the narrow staircase that creaked with every step. Ethan could feel the pulse of tension in the air. When they reached the apartment door, Claire knocked softly. "Oliver, it's me." There was a pause before the sound of footsteps approached. The door opened a crack, revealing Oliver's familiar face, thin, pale, and marked with exhaustion. But his eyes lit up when he saw Claire. "Mom?" Claire pulled him into a tight embrace. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." Oliver stepped back and glanced at Ethan and Marcus with curiosity. "What's going on?" Ethan closed the door behind them. "Oliver, we don't have a lot of time. We need your help." Oliver's brow furrowed. "My help?" Claire nodded and held his hands. "Oliver, the flash drives your father gave you. Do you still have it?" Oliver's eyes flickered with recognition, and he pulled away slightly. I didn't think it was important. It's just an old drive. I used it to back up school files. Marcus stepped forward. That drive holds information the Syndicate will kill for. Oliver's face drained of color. Kill? Claire's voice cracked. They're coming after you, Oliver. Oliver hesitated for a moment, then crossed the room to his desk. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small, silver flash drive. This is it. Ethan reached for it, but the moment his fingers touched the drive, a loud crash came from downstairs. Get back, Marcus barked, pulling them away from the door. Claire gasped as heavy footsteps pounded up the staircase. The door shuddered as someone tried to break it down. Marcus pulled a pistol from his jacket, something Ethan hadn't known he carried, and motioned for them to stay behind the desk. Stay low, Marcus ordered. The door splintered as it burst open. 3 men in black suits entered, their expressions cold and methodical. Ethan's heart pounded. These weren't ordinary thugs. They were professionals. One of the men spotted Oliver. Hand over the drive, he demanded, his voice devoid of emotion. Ethan's eyes locked onto Marcus's. We're not giving them anything. Marcus raised his weapon, his voice steady. You're not walking out of here with it. The leader of the group sneered. You're outnumbered. Marcus didn't flinch. Maybe. But I'll make sure you don't get what you came for. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then, without warning, Marcus fired a shot into the air. The crack echoed through the room, causing the men to duck instinctively. Run! Marcus shouted. Ethan grabbed Oliver's arm and pulled him toward the fire escape, as Claire followed close behind. The men scrambled to recover, but Marcus stayed behind, covering their retreat. They burst through the window and onto the metal fire escape, the icy air hitting their faces. Oliver's breath came in ragged gasps as Ethan led him down the steps 2 at a time. When they reached the alley below, Claire turned back, her eyes wide with fear. Marcus! But Marcus was still upstairs, his shouts drowned out by more gunfire. Ethan gritted his teeth. We can't stop, we have to get Oliver somewhere safe. Claire hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear. We'll come back for him, Ethan promised. She nodded reluctantly, and they ran toward the street, disappearing into the shadows as sirens blared in the distance. As they fled into the night, the flash drive burned like a live coal in Ethan's pocket. This wasn't just a fight for their lives, it was a fight for the truth. The world outside was a blur of cold air and rushing headlights as Ethan sped through the city streets. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his mind replaying the moment they'd left Marcus behind in that cramped apartment. Gunfire still echoed in his ears. Claire sat in the back seat, holding Oliver close. Her son's breath was shaky, his face pale. He clutched the flash drive like a lifeline. Is Marcus... Oliver's voice broke. Is he... okay? Ethan's jaw clenched as he forced the thought away. We'll find out. But right now, we need to get somewhere safe. Claire's voice was thin, fragile. Where? Ethan took a sharp right turn, heading toward the outskirts of the city. I know a place. 20 minutes later, they arrived at an old, run-down motel on the edge of town. Its neon sign flickered, spelling out only part of its name. Wayfarer Inn. The manager barely glanced at them as Ethan paid cash for 2 rooms. Inside the room, Claire sat on the edge of the bed, still trembling. Oliver perched beside her, his shoulders hunched. Ethan locked the door and slid the chain across. We're safe for now, he assured them, though the words felt hollow. Claire looked up, her eyes red from holding back tears. We left him, Ethan exhaled slowly. Marcus knew the risks. He wanted us to get out. If we didn't, Oliver wouldn't be sitting here right now. Oliver stared at the floor. Why would they come after us for something like this? He held up the flash drive. What's really on here? Ethan sat down at the small table by the window, pulling out his laptop. There's only one way to find out. He inserted the flash drive into the port. A folder popped up, protected by a password. Claire's gaze flickered with fear as she saw the files. "James told me about the drive once," she murmured. "He said it held insurance." Ethan frowned. Insurance for what? Claire wrapped her arms around herself. Names, transactions, every deal the syndicate ever made. James thought if anything happened to us, this would be enough to keep Oliver safe. Ethan's stomach twisted. "It's not just money laundering, is it?" Claire shook her head. "It's everything. Bribes, smuggling operations, even connections to politicians." Ethan leaned forward, typing in possible passwords. "If we can crack this, we can expose everything." Oliver bit his lip nervously. "What if we can't?" "We will," Ethan said, more determined than ever. But the truth was, he wasn't sure how much time they had before the syndicate caught up with them. An hour passed with no luck. The password was more complex than anything Ethan had anticipated. Claire paced while Oliver stared at the ceiling, clearly fighting to stay awake after the adrenaline crash. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Everyone froze. Claire's hand shot to Oliver's shoulder. Ethan grabbed the small kitchen knife from the counter and approached the door slowly. "Who is it?" Ethan's voice was steady, but cautious. "It's me." The voice was muffled, but familiar. Ethan hesitated, his pulse racing. Slowly, he looked through the peephole. Relief hit him like a wave. He unlatched the chain and opened the door. Marcus stumbled in, holding his side, his shirt dark with blood. "Marcus!" Claire rushed to help him to the bed. Ethan shut and locked the door behind them. "What the hell happened?" Marcus groaned as he sat down. "They grazed me, but I got out." He winced, clutching his ribs. "The cops showed up just in time to scare them off. I slipped away before anyone could ask questions." Claire grabbed a towel from the bathroom and pressed it gently against his side. "You need a doctor." "No hospitals," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "If the syndicate has people inside law enforcement, they'll track me." Ethan grabbed the first aid kit from the kitchenette. "Then we do this ourselves." As they worked to patch Marcus up, Claire asked the question that had been burning inside her. "Why did you stay behind?" Marcus met her gaze, his expression grim. "Because they weren't just after the drive, they were after you. They didn't care if they killed me, but they wanted to drag you both back." Claire's hands trembled as she wrapped the bandage around his wound. "They won't stop, will they?" Marcus shook his head. "Not unless we stop them first." Once Marcus was stable, Ethan sat back down at the laptop, staring at the locked folder. "We need to break this encryption." Marcus, pale but steady, leaned forward. "We'll need help. I know someone who owes me a favor." Ethan raised a brow. "Someone we can trust?" Marcus nodded. "She's a cybersecurity expert. She used to hack for the syndicate before she got out. If anyone can crack this, it's her." Claire hesitated. "Isn't that dangerous? If they find out—" Marcus's gaze was unwavering. "They won't, not if we move fast." Ethan closed the laptop and exhaled. "Then we find her. But first, you need to rest." Marcus gave a weak nod, exhaustion finally overtaking him. Claire sat beside Oliver, brushing a hand over his hair as he drifted off to sleep. Ethan watched them for a moment. Claire's love for her son was fierce, unbreakable. He admired that. He stepped out into the cold night air, needing a moment alone. The stars above flickered, distant and indifferent. His mind raced with everything they had learned. His restaurant, the place he had poured his heart and soul into, had been used as a front for a criminal empire. His gaze hardened. He wouldn't let the syndicate destroy everything. Not Claire, not Oliver, and not Gourmet Haven. A sound behind him made him tense. "Thinking about how to win?" Claire's voice was soft. Ethan turned to see her standing by the door, arms wrapped around herself. "Something like that." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "I never wanted to drag you into this." You didn't drag me, Ethan said firmly. I chose this. Claire's eyes shimmered. Why? Ethan hesitated, then spoke quietly. Because you matter. And Oliver matters. You gave me everything once, Claire. Now it's my turn. For a moment, the chaos of the world around them seemed to fade. Claire reached out, placing her hand over his. We'll get through this, she whispered. Ethan nodded. Together. As they returned inside, the weight of what lay ahead settled over them. Marcus stirred from the bed, his voice hoarse but determined. Let's finish this. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time, Ethan wasn't just fighting for his restaurant, he was fighting for something bigger, for family, for justice, and for freedom from the shadows of the past. The next morning arrived too soon. The motel room was bathed in pale light, as Ethan double-checked the locks on the door. Marcus was still resting, though his face had regained some color. Claire sat quietly by Oliver's side, gently smoothing his hair as he slept. Ethan took a deep breath and opened his phone. You said you know someone who can crack this, he said, glancing at Marcus. Marcus sat up slowly, wincing. Her name's Riley Thompson. She used to work for the Syndicate as one of their top hackers. She got out years ago, changed her identity, and vanished. But I stayed in touch, just in case. Claire frowned. And you're sure we can trust her? Marcus nodded. Riley's got every reason to hate them. The Syndicate destroyed her life too. Ethan hesitated. Every move they made felt like stepping on a landmine. Where is she? Marcus rubbed a hand over his face. Last I checked, she was in a small tech repair shop in Brighton, a couple of hours from here. Ethan grabbed his jacket. Then we don't have any time to waste. Claire looked up. I'm coming. Ethan shook his head. Claire. I'm not staying behind, she interrupted, standing. Her eyes were fierce. We started this together. I'm not going to sit here and wait while you chase ghosts. Marcus pushed himself to his feet, despite the pain. She's right. Besides, if Riley sees me alone, she might not even open the door. Ethan sighed and nodded. All right, but we move fast. If the Syndicate's tracking us, we need to stay one step ahead. The drive to Brighton was quiet, the tension in the car thick. Oliver had stayed behind at the motel, under the watchful eye of a retired restaurant supplier Ethan trusted like family, a man named Paul who had seen enough trouble in his day to recognize danger. Claire stared out the window, her thoughts clearly on Oliver. I hate leaving him, she whispered. Ethan reached over and gently squeezed her hand. He's safe, Claire. And when this is over, you'll never have to look over your shoulder again. Claire's lips tightened into a thin line, but she nodded. As they approached Brighton, Marcus directed them to a narrow side street lined with old brick buildings. A faded sign read, Tech Haven Repairs. The shop's windows were covered with dusty blinds, and the door had several locks and an electronic keypad. Marcus stepped forward and knocked in a specific rhythm, 3 short, 1 long. There was silence, then the faint hum of machinery behind the door. A voice crackled from a hidden speaker. Marcus Reed? I thought you were dead. Marcus smiled faintly. Not yet, Riley. Open the door. There was a pause, then the sound of locks clicking. The door swung open, revealing a woman in her early 30s with sharp green eyes and dyed purple hair tied into a messy bun. She wore an oversized hoodie and cargo pants, and her arms were crossed as she studied them. You brought company, Riley said suspiciously. Marcus gestured to Ethan and Claire. They're with me. We need your help. Riley's gaze lingered on Claire. You're James Bennett's wife, aren't you? Claire stiffened but nodded. I was. Riley's eyes softened. I'm sorry. James was a good man. Too good for the mess he got pulled into. Claire swallowed hard. That's why we're here. Riley stepped aside, motioning them in. Come on, let's talk. The inside of Riley's workshop was a maze of monitors, servers, and tangled wires. Blue and green screens cast a glow over the room as numbers and codes scrolled across her monitors. Riley slid into her chair and swiveled to face them. "All right, start talking." Ethan pulled out the flash drive and placed it on the desk. "This has everything. The syndicate's deals, their contacts. It's encrypted. We need you to break it." Riley picked up the drive and inspected it. "This looks like the kind of encryption the syndicate used for their top-tier files. Breaking it won't be easy." Marcus folded his arms. "But you can do it, right?" Riley smirked. "I'm the best for a reason." She slid the drive into her main computer. A string of code appeared on the screen, followed by a progress bar. Riley's fingers danced over the keyboard as she bypassed firewalls and security layers. Ethan and Claire watched in silence, their nerves stretched thin. Each second felt like an hour. After what felt like an eternity, Riley muttered a curse under her breath. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Riley frowned at the screen. "There's an extra layer of security, something custom. It's not just encryption, it's rigged to trigger a wipe if the wrong key is entered." Claire's breath caught. "Can you stop it?" Riley nodded, though her expression was grim. "I can, but I'll need to bypass it manually, which could take a few hours." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Do whatever you need to." Riley's hands moved faster, sweat beading on her forehead as she worked. Minutes turned into hours. The room was filled with the soft hum of computers and the rapid clicking of keys. Suddenly the screen flashed green. "Got it," Riley announced, leaning back with a triumphant grin. The folder opened, revealing dozens of files names, bank transfers, meeting locations. It was everything the syndicate wanted to keep buried. Claire leaned over, scanning the screen. Her breath hitched as she recognized some of the names. Politicians, judges, business owners. Marcus's face darkened. "It's worse than I thought." Ethan's jaw tightened. "This is it. This is enough to take them down." Riley nodded. "But it's dangerous. If the syndicate finds out you have this—" "They already know," Ethan said. Riley's smile faded. "Then you need to move fast. I'll copy the files onto a secure drive, but you'll need a safe way to get this to someone who can actually make it count." Marcus straightened. "The FBI." Claire hesitated. "Can we trust them?" Ethan met her gaze. "We don't have a choice. We need someone with power to take this public." Riley handed them the secure drive. "Be careful. You've got a ticking time bomb here." Ethan slipped the drive into his pocket. "We know." Marcus clapped Riley on the shoulder. "You saved us." Riley's smirk returned. "Just make sure you bring them down." Claire's eyes burned with quiet determination. "We will." As they left the shop and stepped back into the cold air, Ethan felt the weight of the drive pressing against his chest. The syndicate was closer than ever, but so was justice. The drive back from Brighton was anything but calm. The tension in the car was thick as Ethan, Claire, and Marcus absorbed the gravity of what they now possessed. The secure drive in Ethan's jacket felt like a live grenade. Claire sat silently, her fingers tapping nervously against her leg. Marcus broke the silence. "We have the proof, but how do we deliver it without getting killed first?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "We'll contact the FBI, but we can't just walk into their office. If the wrong person gets wind of this, the syndicate will strike before we get a chance to explain." Claire's gaze was distant. "James always told me there were only a handful of people who could be trusted." Marcus nodded. He was right. Most of the system is either compromised or too scared to take action. Ethan turned to Marcus. "Do you know anyone we can trust?" Marcus paused. "Yeah, I've got someone in mind." He hesitated before continuing. "Agent Jonathan Hayes. He's old school, one of the few who never sold out." Claire's eyes sharpened. "You trust him?" Marcus nodded. "With my life." Ethan exhaled slowly. "All right. We'll contact Hayes, but first, we need to check on Oliver." They pulled into the parking lot of the motel just before sunset. The old sign buzzed and flickered, casting shadows over the lot. Ethan's eyes immediately scanned for anything unusual. The lot seemed quiet, too quiet. Claire noticed it too. She bolted from the car, rushing to their room. Ethan and Marcus followed close behind. Claire unlocked the door, calling out frantically, "Oliver?" The room was empty. Her heart stopped. The bed was unmade, the lamp tipped over. Oliver's jacket was still draped over the chair, but there was no sign of him or Paul. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as he checked the bathroom and the closets. Nothing. Marcus swore under his breath. "This doesn't feel right." Claire's voice cracked as she backed against the wall. "They took him, didn't they?" Before Ethan could answer, his phone buzzed. A single message flashed across the screen. "We have the boy. You know what we want. Bring the drive." Claire let out a strangled cry and grabbed Ethan's arm. "We have to do something." Ethan's mind raced. "We will." Marcus's face hardened. "They're baiting us. If we go in blind, they'll kill us and take the drive." Ethan took a deep breath. "We're not going in blind." Claire's eyes were wild. "What do you mean?" "We'll meet their demands," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But we'll bring Hayes into this." Marcus's brow furrowed. "Are you sure? If they realize Hayes is involved, they'll panic." Ethan nodded grimly. "They already know we're desperate. But if we plan this right, we'll turn their trap against them." 10 minutes later, Marcus placed a call to Agent Jonathan Hayes. "Hayes," the gruff voice answered. Marcus spoke quickly but calmly. "It's Marcus. We need your help. It's big." There was a pause before Hayes responded. "How big?" "Enough to bring down the syndicate." The line went silent for a moment. Then Hayes spoke again. "Where are you?" Marcus glanced at Ethan and Claire. "Brighton Motel. But they've taken a kid. We're meeting them to make the exchange." Hayes's voice sharpened. "Do not go alone. I'll mobilize a team." "No teams," Ethan cut in. "If they see agents, Oliver's dead." Hayes hesitated. "Then what's your plan?" "We need you there," Marcus said, "but you can't move in until the timing's right." Hayes was quiet for a beat before responding. "Send me the location. I'll be there." The exchange was set to take place at an abandoned train yard on the outskirts of the city, an isolated place surrounded by rusting rail cars and broken tracks. The air was sharp with the smell of iron and dust as they arrived. Twilight settled over the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. Claire was barely holding herself together. "If anything happens to Oliver..." Ethan touched her shoulder. "We'll get him back." Marcus pulled a gun from his jacket and checked the chamber. "Stay sharp." They moved cautiously toward the rendezvous point. A single figure emerged from behind an old rail car, tall, wearing a black coat. Claire gasped as she recognized him. "Paul!" It was Oliver's guardian from the motel, alive, but barely. His face was bruised, and his hands were tied behind his back. Paul's voice was hoarse. "They have him. He's in the freight car." Ethan scanned the rail yard and saw the old freight car at the end of the tracks, its doors slightly ajar. A voice rang out from the shadows. "Drop your weapons." Ethan froze as 3 armed men stepped into view. The leader smirked, his eyes cold and calculating. "The drive? Now." Claire clenched her fists. "Where's my son?" The leader nodded toward the freight car. "He's alive for now, but that can change." Marcus shot Ethan a warning glance. "We can't trust them." Ethan's hand drifted toward the flash drive in his pocket. "You'll get what you want," he said slowly, "but only after we see the boy." The leader's smile faltered. "You're not in a position to negotiate." Just then, Marcus subtly pressed a button on the small earpiece hidden under his collar, a silent signal to Hayes. A low rumble filled the air as the faint sound of engines approached. Hayes's team was moving into position. The leader took a step forward. "The drive, or the boy dies." Ethan's heart pounded as he tossed the drive onto the ground between them. There! Let him go! One of the men reached down to grab the drive, but as his fingers closed around it, a sudden flashbang exploded in the distance. The leader shouted in confusion as a series of bright lights lit up the train yard. Hayes's voice echoed through the chaos. FBI! Drop your weapons! The gunman panicked and opened fire. Marcus dove to the side, returning fire as Ethan and Claire rushed toward the freight car. Oliver! Claire cried as she pulled open the door. Inside, Oliver was bound but unharmed. His face lit up when he saw her. Mom! Ethan helped her untie him, then shielded them both as bullets whizzed past. The gunfire grew louder before slowly fading as Hayes's team overpowered the Syndicate's men, one by one. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, the train yard fell silent. Hayes approached, his gun raised. It's over. The leader of the group lay on the ground, hands cuffed, his face twisted with rage. Claire pulled Oliver into her arms, tears streaming down her face. I've got you. Ethan exhaled deeply, the weight of the moment sinking in. We did it. Marcus nodded, though his face was grim. This was just one battle. The real fight starts now. As they left the train yard, Ethan knew they had won a critical victory, but the war against the Syndicate was far from over. The drive back to the city was quiet, filled with the hum of the car engine and the sound of Oliver's soft breathing as he slept in the back seat, his head resting on Claire's shoulder. She stroked his hair gently, her eyes still red from crying. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel was tight. Though they had rescued Oliver and handed the Syndicate a major blow, a knot of unease sat heavy in his stomach. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. He finally broke the silence. We got the drive, the boy. But why does it still feel like we're losing? Ethan glanced at him. Because we've only cut off one head of the snake. There's still more of them. And they're going to come for us harder than ever. Claire's voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of fear. What about the rest of the names? The politicians? The judges? Everyone they've corrupted? Ethan nodded grimly. We need to get this out to the public. Marcus's jaw tightened. We've got Hayes. He'll take it from here, right? Ethan hesitated. Maybe. Claire turned to look at him, her expression sharp. What do you mean? Ethan exhaled slowly. We can't assume Hayes isn't being watched. The Syndicate's reach runs deep. If we hand everything over to the wrong people, they'll bury it, Claire. And this will never end. Claire's hands balled into fists. So, what do we do? Marcus rubbed a hand over his face. We need insurance, a way to make sure the truth gets out no matter what. Ethan's eyes darkened with determination. We need to make it public ourselves. The next morning, they gathered in the small safe house where Paul had relocated. The air was thick with tension as Hayes arrived, his expression grave. He placed his briefcase on the table and pulled out several folders. First, Hayes began, you all need to know something. After last night's raid, we seized a few of their communications. They knew we were coming. Marcus frowned. A mole? Hayes nodded. Someone tipped them off. Claire's face paled. But that means someone close to us? Ethan's pulse quickened. He thought of everyone they had crossed paths with in the last few weeks. Not necessarily, Hayes said. The Syndicate's network is vast. They might have picked up whispers from one of their informants. But what's important is that they're scrambling now. They know their secrets are exposed. Ethan leaned forward, which means they'll be desperate. Hayes's expression hardened. Exactly. That's why we need to move quickly. I've arranged a press conference with one of the few journalists I trust, a reporter who's been digging into corruption for years. Claire's eyes lit up with hope. You're making it public? Hayes hesitated. Yes, but I need that drive, Ethan. We need the full evidence to back up the claims. Marcus shot a glance at Ethan, who didn't move. Give me a second, Ethan said, motioning for Marcus and Claire to step aside. As soon as they were out of Hayes's earshot, Marcus whispered, "Are you sure about this? What if Hayes's people are compromised?" Claire's eyes darted between them. "But we can't do this alone, can we?" Ethan's mind raced. "We can't afford to play it safe, but I'm not handing this over without a backup plan." He turned back to Hayes. "We'll give you the drive, but we're keeping a copy for insurance." Hayes frowned, but nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just make sure you stay out of sight. If the syndicate catches wind of this, you're all targets." An hour later, Ethan sat at the safehouse computer, watching the files from the secure drive upload to an encrypted cloud server. Marcus paced behind him, arms crossed. "This backup better work," Marcus muttered. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "It will. And if anything goes wrong, we release it all." Claire entered the room, carrying a cup of coffee. "What about Oliver? We've kept him safe so far, but if we go public—" Ethan's heart sank as he looked at her. "We'll send him somewhere secure, somewhere the syndicate can't reach." Oliver appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "You mean you're sending me away?" Claire's breath caught. "Oliver." Ethan knelt in front of him, "Just for a little while, until this is over." Tears filled Oliver's eyes. "But what if something happens to you?" Claire wrapped him in a hug. "Nothing will. I promise." Marcus watched silently, his usual stoicism cracking. "We'll protect him. And each other." Later that afternoon, Hayes called with an update. The press conference was set for the following day. Ethan felt a rush of nerves as the reality of their plan set in. This was it, the moment that could end everything or destroy them all. Just as he hung up, there was a knock at the door. Marcus moved to answer it cautiously, his hand hovering near his concealed pistol. He opened the door just a crack and froze. On the other side stood a woman in a sleek black coat with piercing blue eyes. "Hello, Marcus." Her voice was cold and familiar. Marcus's face darkened. "Lauren!" Claire stiffened. "Who is she?" Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Marcus's expression was harder than Ethan had ever seen. Lauren smirked, stepping forward. "Let's not pretend you didn't expect me." Ethan stepped forward. "Who is she?" Marcus's voice was like ice. "She's the syndicate's lieutenant." Claire's breath hitched. Lauren's gaze swept the room, landing on the small bag by Claire's feet, Oliver's. "You thought you could outmaneuver us," Lauren said, her voice like velvet laced with venom. "But you underestimated how far we'll go." Marcus's hand gripped the doorframe. "Leave. Now." Lauren tilted her head. "You think I came alone?" At her words, two black SUVs pulled into view outside, their engines rumbling ominously. Claire whispered in panic, "They found us." Ethan's mind raced. The files were still uploading, only 73% complete. Lauren's voice was calm, but deadly. "Hand over the drive, or I'll make you watch everything you love burn." Ethan stepped closer, standing between Lauren and Claire. "You won't get another chance," Lauren warned. The clock was ticking. The files needed time to finish uploading, but time was exactly what they didn't have. Ethan's eyes flicked to Marcus. "We hold the line." Marcus gave a sharp nod. "To the end." Lauren's eyes gleamed. "Then let's see how far you'll go." The air felt thick with tension as Lauren's smirk widened. The black SUVs idled outside, their tinted windows concealing whatever threat lay within. Marcus's breathing was steady, but his eyes were locked on the woman who had haunted his nightmares. Ethan's mind raced. They needed more time, just a few more minutes for the files to finish uploading. He met Marcus's gaze and saw the same calculation. They couldn't afford to lose their only leverage. Claire's voice was low but firm as she clutched Oliver's hand. "What do we do?" Ethan spoke calmly, though his heart pounded. "Claire, take Oliver into the back room. Lock the door and stay low." Oliver's eyes widened. "But—" Claire knelt, her voice soft but urgent. "Listen to Ethan. I need you to be brave, sweetheart. Can you do that for me? Oliver nodded reluctantly, and Claire led him away, casting one last worried glance at Ethan and Marcus before disappearing behind the door. Lauren watched the scene unfold with amusement. Touching, but it won't save you. She stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking against the pavement. Let me make this simple. Hand over the drive and no one else has to die. Marcus sneered. You expect us to believe that? Lauren's eyes gleamed coldly. No, but you don't have much of a choice. Ethan took a deep breath. We're not giving you anything. Lauren's expression hardened. She raised her hand, signaling to the SUVs. The doors swung open, and armed men in tactical gear stepped out, their rifles glinting in the fading afternoon light. Marcus cursed under his breath. We're outnumbered. Ethan's voice was sharp. Then we even the odds. Marcus moved quickly, slamming the door shut and locking it as Ethan rushed to the computer. The upload bar crawled toward 92%. They were so close, but time was slipping away. Get ready, Ethan said, grabbing a handgun from the desk drawer and tossing it to Marcus. The first gunshot shattered the window as the men outside opened fire. Glass rained down as Ethan ducked behind the counter, adrenaline surging through his veins. Marcus returned fire, his shots precise and measured. We can't hold them forever. Ethan's eyes flicked to the back room where Claire and Oliver hid. We just need 2 more minutes. Lauren stood outside, unfazed as bullets tore through the air around her. She raised a radio to her lips. Breach. The tactical team closed in, moving with military precision. One of them set a small explosive on the front door. Inside, Ethan heard the faint beep, 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 and his heart sank. Marcus! Ethan shouted. Marcus's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. Take cover! The door exploded inwards, a wave of smoke and debris filling the room. Ethan and Marcus hit the floor as the front wall of the safe house splintered apart. The first man stepped through the smoke, rifle raised, but Marcus was faster. He fired a clean shot, and the man crumpled to the ground. Ethan aimed for the second assailant, taking him down before he could get a shot off. But more poured in behind them. We're running out of room! Marcus shouted as they retreated toward the hallway. Ethan's eyes darted back to the screen 97%. In the back room, Claire held Oliver close as the sounds of gunfire and explosions shook the walls. Oliver's small body trembled against her. It's going to be okay, Claire whispered, though her voice wavered. The doorknob rattled, and Claire's heart jumped. She grabbed a heavy chair and braced it against the door. Mom! Oliver's voice was barely a whisper. Claire looked down at him, forcing a smile. We're almost through this. In the main room, Lauren strode through the smoke like a specter. Her men fanned out, covering the perimeter. Marcus ducked behind the overturned table and fired another round. They're pushing too hard. Ethan's teeth clenched. They're after the drive. Marcus glanced at the shattered window. If they get through, it's over. The upload bar hit 99%. The final seconds ticked down like a countdown to salvation or disaster. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out the drive, holding it up so Lauren could see. You want it? He shouted. Lauren's eyes locked onto the drive like a predator spotting its prey. Then come and get it, Ethan growled. He threw the drive across the room, sending it clattering near the doorway. Lauren's lieutenant lunged for it, but Marcus fired first, striking the man in the shoulder. Lauren snarled and moved to grab the drive herself, but as she bent down, the screen behind Ethan flashed, "Upload complete." The message was sent. Marcus's face lit up with triumph. It's done. Ethan's shoulders sagged in relief for half a second before he noticed the fury in Lauren's eyes. No, she hissed, realizing too late what had happened. Ethan grabbed Marcus's arm. We need to get out of here. Lauren raised her gun, her face twisted with rage. In the back room, Claire flinched as a shot rang out louder than the others. Her heart froze. The door burst open and Ethan stumbled in, blood trickling from a graze on his arm. Claire ran to him, her eyes wide. "Ethan!" "We're okay," Ethan panted. "But we need to move. Now." Marcus appeared behind him, covering the hall with his weapon. Oliver scrambled to his feet, gripping Claire's hand tightly as Ethan led them toward the back exit. Lauren's shouts echoed from the main room. "Find them. Don't let them escape." Ethan kicked open the back door, and they spilled out into the alleyway. A black sedan was parked at the end of the narrow street, its engine running. Hayes stepped out, his face grim. "Get in!" Marcus didn't hesitate. He bundled Oliver and Claire into the back seat, while Ethan slid in beside Hayes. The tires screeched as they sped away, the shadows of their pursuers shrinking in the distance. In the silence of the car, Claire clung to Oliver, whispering reassurances. Marcus exhaled deeply, wiping the sweat and ash from his face. Hayes's voice was steady, but cold. "They know the truth's out now." Ethan nodded, his mind still racing. "It's not over, but we've finally got the upper hand." Marcus's gaze was hard. If they're cornered, they'll be more dangerous than ever. Ethan's eyes flicked to Oliver and Claire. "Then we finish this." Hayes tightened his grip on the wheel, his expression unreadable. In the back, Oliver's small voice broke the silence. "Did we win?" Claire kissed the top of his head. "Not yet," she whispered. "But we will." The battle had begun in earnest, but the end game was near. The sedan tore down the darkened streets, weaving through traffic as Hayes drove like a man on a mission. The weight of everything they had fought for pressed down on them like a storm cloud. Claire held Oliver close, whispering reassurances as he stared wide-eyed at the chaos they had left behind. Ethan's gaze remained fixed out the window, watching for any sign of pursuit. His heart was still pounding from the firefight. Marcus sat rigid, scanning the rearview mirror. "How long until they regroup?" Hayes's jaw was tight. "Not long. We've hit them hard, but they're not finished yet." Claire shifted forward, her voice low but fierce. "So what now? We've exposed the truth. Shouldn't this be over?" Ethan shook his head. "It's not that simple. The Syndicate still has resources and people in high places. Just because the files are out doesn't mean they'll go down without a fight." Marcus nodded grimly. "They're going to double down, and if they can't win in the shadows, they'll go for blood." Hayes's voice was measured but firm. "We have one shot at ending this for good, and it starts with their leader." Claire frowned. "You mean Lauren?" Hayes shook his head. "No, Lauren's dangerous, but she's not the top. She's a lieutenant." He took a sharp turn, the tires squealing. "The real leader is someone else, someone we haven't identified. Until now." Ethan sat forward, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" Hayes reached into the center console and pulled out a tablet. He tapped a few buttons, bringing up a dossier with a blurred photo. "This came through from our analysts an hour ago. We cross-referenced recent communications from the raid with the files you uploaded." Claire leaned closer, reading the name at the top. Her eyes widened. "No, it can't be." Marcus's face darkened. "Is this a joke?" Ethan's blood ran cold as he read the name aloud. Senator William Cross. The revelation hung in the air like a death sentence. Cross was one of the most respected figures in the country, an advocate for justice, a philanthropist, and a man who had spoken out against corruption his entire career. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "He's their leader?" Hayes nodded grimly. "All of it, the connections, the cover-ups lead back to him. He's the one pulling the strings." Ethan leaned back, stunned. How did he hide it for so long?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "By playing the hero. Nobody questions a man who looks like he's fighting the bad guys." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "We've traced him to a private estate outside the city. If we can bring him in, we can dismantle the entire syndicate." Ethan's mind was spinning. Cross had been untouchable for years, a symbol of integrity. Exposing him would be a seismic shift, but the fallout would be massive. Claire's voice was steady, though her eyes were fierce. Then we end it tonight. The car sped toward the outskirts of the city, where the skyline gave way to sprawling estates and wooded hills. The route was quiet, but the tension was suffocating. Hayes pulled over just before the turn leading to Cross's property. They stepped out, their breath visible in the cold night air. Ethan surveyed the area. The estate was heavily guarded, with cameras at every corner and a patrol of armed men at the gates. Marcus loaded his weapon, his expression grim. "We're going in loud, aren't we?" Hayes shook his head. "No, we're going in smart. We can't afford another shootout." He pointed to a service road leading around the back. "There's a blind spot in their perimeter. If we move fast and quiet, we can get close before they even know we're here." Ethan nodded, adjusting his jacket. "Let's move." They crept along the service road, their steps muffled by the dirt and fallen leaves. Hayes led the way, signaling for them to stop as a guard passed nearby. They held their breath as the man's footsteps faded into the distance. Claire whispered to Ethan, "Do you really think Cross is there?" Ethan's eyes were hard. "He has to be." They reached the edge of the property, where a high fence loomed above them. Marcus pulled a set of bolt cutters from his bag and clipped a section of the chain link. One by one, they slipped through the gap and moved toward the mansion. The lights from the windows cast long shadows across the manicured lawn. Hayes motioned toward the east wing. "Cross's office is there. If he's hiding anything, it'll be in that room." Ethan exchanged a look with Marcus, who nodded. They moved swiftly but silently toward the side entrance. Hayes picked the lock, and the door clicked open. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the grand hallways filled with priceless art and ornate furniture. They passed through the shadows like ghosts, their breath shallow as they closed in on their target. They reached the office door. Hayes knelt and began working on the lock, while Marcus kept watch. Claire's fingers trembled as she gripped her gun. "Please let this work," she whispered. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single desk lamp. A large, polished desk sat in the center, covered in documents and photos. And sitting calmly behind it, as though he had been expecting them, was Senator William Cross. Ethan's heart stopped. Cross looked up from a glass of whiskey, his face calm and composed. He gestured to the chairs across from him. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." Claire's breath hitched. You knew?" Cross smiled coldly. "Of course. Did you really think I'd get this far without contingency plans?" Ethan stepped forward, his gun raised. "It's over, Cross." Cross sipped his drink leisurely. "No, Ethan, it's far from over." Hayes moved to flank him. "We've exposed everything. Your syndicate is finished." Cross set his glass down. Do you know how many favors I've collected? How many people owe me their careers? When this is over, the world will mourn me as a martyr, and you?" He chuckled darkly. "You'll be hunted as traitors." Claire's voice shook. "You've destroyed lives. For what? Power?" Cross's expression hardened. "For control. The world doesn't run on ideals, Claire. It runs on leverage." Ethan's hand tightened on the gun. "Not anymore." Before Cross could respond, the distant sound of sirens grew louder. Cross's smile faltered. Hayes stepped forward, pulling out his badge. "You're done, Senator." Cross's eyes burned with hatred. "This isn't justice. This is treason." Ethan's gaze was steady. "No, this is the end." The doors burst open as federal agents poured into the room, surrounding Cross. Claire held Oliver close as Cross was dragged away, still shouting. Marcus turned to Ethan, his voice low. "We did it." Ethan nodded, though a part of him knew the fight wasn't truly over. The fallout would be immense, but for the first time, they had hope. Claire looked at Ethan, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's over, isn't it?" Ethan took her hand and squeezed gently. "It's over. As they stepped into the cold night air, the weight of their journey began to lift. They had fought through darkness and betrayal, but together they had made it to the light. The cold night air wrapped around them as they emerged from the mansion. The sky above was beginning to lighten, a pale shade of gray creeping over the horizon. The ordeal was finally over, or at least that was what they told themselves as the black SUVs pulled away, carrying Senator William Cross into custody. Ethan stood at the edge of the lawn, his breath visible in the chill. His hands were still trembling, though he tried to hide it. Claire approached him slowly, her eyes searching his face. "We won," she said softly. Ethan exhaled, a shaky breath that didn't feel like victory. "Did we?" Claire reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "We exposed the truth. We stopped Cross. We stopped them." Ethan met her gaze, finding a calm resolve in her eyes. "But the damage he caused, it won't go away overnight." Claire squeezed his hand. "No, but it's a start." Behind them, Marcus was talking with Hayes, who was still on the phone with federal agents coordinating the aftermath. Marcus's usual stoicism had softened. His shoulders relaxed for the first time in what felt like years. Oliver peeked out from the SUV where he'd been resting. His eyes were still tired, but filled with curiosity. He ran to Claire, who pulled him into her arms. "Is it really over?" Oliver asked, his small voice hesitant. Claire kissed his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. We're safe now." Oliver's gaze shifted to Ethan. "Are we going home?" Ethan crouched down to his level and gave him a warm smile. "We are. No more hiding." Oliver smiled a genuine wide grin, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. The ride back to the city was silent but peaceful. No one spoke much, lost in their thoughts. Claire stared out the window as the familiar city skyline came into view. Marcus, sitting beside Hayes, stared straight ahead, his face unreadable. When they arrived back at the safe house, the tension eased. Oliver ran inside and flopped onto the couch, clearly relieved to be somewhere familiar. Claire followed him, her shoulders finally relaxing. Ethan paused outside, taking a long, deep breath. Marcus joined him, crossing his arms as he leaned against the wall. "We actually did it," Marcus muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Ethan nodded, glancing sideways. "Thanks to you," Marcus snorted. "Let's not get sentimental." Ethan chuckled. "Wouldn't dream of it." They stood in comfortable silence until Hayes approached, his phone still in hand. "Cross is in custody," he said. "But you know this doesn't end here, right?" Ethan's face hardened. "I know. There's going to be fallout. His allies are still out there." Hayes nodded. "But we've crippled their operations. And now the public knows the truth." He paused, lowering his voice. "You've done more than anyone ever could. But it's time for you to step out of the fight, Ethan." Claire appeared in the doorway, watching the conversation unfold. Hayes continued. "You've given everything. Now, maybe it's time to live your life." Ethan hesitated. He had been fighting for so long that he didn't know what normal life looked like anymore. But then he saw Claire and Oliver waiting for him, his family. The life he had fought so hard to protect. He nodded slowly. "You're right. It's time." Hayes offered a small smile and extended his hand. "Take care of yourself." Ethan shook it firmly. "You too." Marcus watched Hayes walk away, then glanced at Ethan. "So, what now?" Ethan looked at Claire and Oliver, who were waiting for him by the door. His heart felt lighter than it had in years. "We start over." Marcus smirked. "Guess that means I'm sticking around." Ethan grinned. "I wouldn't have it any other way." A few days later, life began to return to something resembling normalcy. The news was flooded with stories of the Syndicate's takedown. William Cross's arrest had shocked the nation, but the evidence was undeniable. His carefully constructed empire of lies had crumbled. Claire watched one of the broadcasts as she sipped her coffee. Reporters debated the extent of the fallout. But for Claire, all that mattered was that the fight was over. Ethan entered the room, freshly showered and looking more relaxed than she'd seen him in months. He leaned against the counter, watching her with a soft smile. "Anything new?" he asked, nodding at the screen. Claire shook her head. "Just the aftermath." Oliver ran into the room, holding up a sheet of paper. "Look, my teacher said I can do my project on heroes." Claire knelt to look at the paper. "That's amazing, Oliver. Who are you going to write about?" Oliver looked between Claire and Ethan with a mischievous grin. "You too." Claire laughed, ruffling his hair. "We're not heroes, sweetie." Oliver crossed his arms. "Yes, you are." Ethan's heart swelled. He crouched next to Oliver. "Well, if we're heroes, you're the bravest one of all." Oliver beamed and hugged Ethan tightly. That evening, the three of them took a walk through the city. The air was crisp, the streets alive with lights and sounds. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan wasn't scanning the crowd for threats. Claire took his hand as they strolled past the park. "It feels strange, doesn't it? To be normal," Ethan smiled. "Yeah, but I think I could get used to it." They sat on a bench as Oliver ran ahead to watch the street performers. Claire leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. "We finally made it," she whispered. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, closing his eyes for a moment. "Yeah, we did." The streetlights flickered on as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city. Their journey had been long and filled with shadows, but they had fought their way back to the light. And now they had a future, together. As the sun sets on Ethan, Claire, and Oliver's incredible journey, we're reminded that even in the darkest of times, resilience, courage, and love can guide us back to the light. Their fight wasn't just about taking down the syndicate, it was about protecting the bonds that make us who we are. And though their battle is over, the echoes of their story will live on. If you've been inspired by their journey and want to see more gripping stories filled with action, emotion, and unexpected twists, we'd love for you to join our storytelling community. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support fuels our passion for creating meaningful stories that connect us all. Thank you for being part of this adventure. Let us know in the comments what moments touched your heart. And if you'd love to see where their next chapter might lead, drop a 1 below. Until next time, stay bold, stay brave, and keep believing that the best is always yet to come. See you in the next story.